following a stall. It can also attain very high angles of attack. One other advantage of the MiG-29 was the short-range R-73 infrared-guided missile that could be aimed and fired through a helmet-mounted sight. Normally, a plane has to be pointed at an enemy fighter to target it. With the R-73, the pilot need only look at a target within 60 degrees of the frontal arc to shoot a missile at it. The US Air Force did not acquire a similar capability until the AIM-9X entered service in 2003. In addition to the R-73, the Fulcrum 7 hardpoints can equip R-27 medium-range missiles, and old R-60 missiles. Some have also been upgraded to fire R-77 long-range air-to-air missiles. Up to 8,000 pounds of air-to-ground munitions can be carried, a significantly lighter load than peer fighter aircraft. Finally, the MiG-29 is designed to function while operating from unprepared airstrips, presumably captured by advancing Russian tank divisions. Its air intakes are specially protected against debris. However, intrinsic design limitations of the MiG-29 have prevented it from aging well. While aerodynamically outstanding, the MiG-29 did not feature modern pilot displays, controls and fly-by-wire avionics. Fulcrum pilots were required to stare down at their cockpit instruments far more than those of Western fighters with modern heads-up displays, and the throttle was not integrated into the stick. The MiG-29's sensors were mediocre. Its N019 Phasotron pulse Doppler radar had a shorter accurate range, 38 miles, than the missiles the MiG-29 carried. Though equipped with an infrared sensor, pilots reported it to be of limited effectiveness. These limitations in part reflected Soviet doctrine in which pilots were intended to be closely directed by ground controllers, so their situation awareness was less of a priority. The lack of modern electronics was what ultimately led the German Air Force to retire its Fulcrums, despite being more agile than their F-4S and Tornadoes. Another major limitation is the MiG-29's limited range of less than 900 miles on internal fuel and lack of in-flight refueling ability, making it primarily useful as a defensive fighter, or one operating above frontline forces. While the Fulcrum may be a bargain for a less wealthy country worried about conflict on its borders, it has less appeal to air forces looking to project power over distance. Finally, like most Soviet-era fighters, while the MiG was designed to withstand rugged handling, it wasn't intended to have a long service life, just 2,500 hours compared to the 6,000 that is typical of US fighters. MiG-29 airframes deteriorated rapidly later in life, and have required extensive and expensive maintenance to keep flying. Malaysia once reported it spent $5 million per year per MiG-29 to keep them flyable. .600 MiG-29s have been produced in all. Originally, the Fulcrum came in just a few variants, the standard single-seat model and a two-seat trainer variant without the radar. A downgraded version, the MiG-29B, was exported abroad. In the 1980s the upgraded MiG-29S appeared, featuring an active jamming system behind the cockpit, improved computers and software and modestly increased fuel and weapons load. Support for new R-27E and R-77 missiles was added. In 1990, the next generation MiG-29M debuted, bringing the Fulcrum up to modern standards with fly-by-wire avionics. With a lighter airframe and more powerful smokeless engines, for lower visibility, the MiG-29M nonetheless appears to be slower and has a lower service ceiling of 50,000 feet. Perhaps because it weighs an extra 1.25 tons. Internal fuel has been expanded for an improved range of over 1,200 miles, a third drop tank can be carried, an in-flight refueling probe is included. 2 hardpoints are added, and the maximum payload is increased over 50% to 12,000 pounds. Rounding out the package is an improved IRST system and an NO1 Ozokmi pulse Doppler radar with a range of 75 miles against targets with a radar cross-section of 5 meters. The Mig-29M was not accepted into Russian service, but it is believed Egypt will receive 50 later this year in a $2 billion contract. Sales to Syria and Serbia are also possible. The Russian and Indian Air Forces have instead opted to use older Fulcrum airframes refitted to the Mig-29M's standards, called the Mig-29 SMT or the Mig-29 UP in Indian service. The SMT and UPG Fulcrums have their service life extended to 4,000 hours, but weapons loads are not quite equal to the Mig-29M's specifications. India's upgrades cost roughly $13 million per airframe, and include foreign avionics. In 2008, Algeria rejected a batch of 34 SMTs as they used old airframes in poor condition rather than newly produced ones stipulated in the contract. The rejected airframes were then put into Russian service and 16 new ones were ordered. Russia intends to maintain a fleet of 60 MiG-29 SMTs. There are numerous Fulcrum variants tailored to the requirements of various air forces. The most notable is the Mig-29K, a novelized derivative of the Mig-29M operated both by the Russian Navy on board the carrier Admiral Kuznetsov, and the Indian Naval Air Arm. The Mig-29K has folding wings, reinforced landing gear and an arrestor hook for carrier operations. The K also has upgraded pilot displays and radar absorbent coatings to reduce its radar signature. Few fighter planes have managed to be so beloved and yet boast such an unfavorable combat record as the Mig-29. Of course, this is in large part because the Fulcrum was usually fielded by less developed countries against Western opponents that were more numerous, better trained, and better organized. Setting the tune of things to come, in the Fulcrum's first confirmed aerial combat, 2 Syrian Mig-29 were shot down by Israeli F-15s in 1989. There are reports Israeli fighters shot down another 2 Syrian MiG-29s in 2001. During the Gulf War, 5 Iraqi MiG-29s were shot down by American F-15s. However, a Fulcrum did successfully hit an F-111 and a B-52 bomber with missiles, though both aircraft managed to return to base. Fulcrums also took a beating in the Ethiopian-Eritrean border conflict of the late 1990s, which featured more evenly matched opponents. Russian mercenaries flew alongside Ethiopian pilots, while Ukrainians supported the Eritrean Air Force. In all, 4 Eritrean MiG-29s were shot down by Ethiopian Su-27s. In exchange, the Eritrean Fulcrums shot down a Su-25. A MiG-21 and an unidentified fighter, possibly a MiG-23. Over multiple engagements, flankers and Fulcrums exchanged over 24 R-27 missiles at long range for only a single hit. Instead, most of the victories were scored in short-range dogfights using A-11 missiles. 16 MiG-29s of the Serbian Air Force opposed NATO's bombing campaign over Kosovo.